We moved to Castleton just 3 years ago from Toronto, and we love it here. Michael really was very happy to move out here, and I'm glad that he had at least one good year out here.
Michael passed away in December of 2014 following a lengthy illness. During the final months of his life, he was cared for by Laura, his partner of almost 38 years, and with the support of the CCAC team of healthcare professionals that included a CCAC care coordinator and Frances, a CCAC community palliative care nurse practitioner.
Michael was all about music. He had been a musician from the time that he was an early teenager, and he grew up in BC in Kelowna, and music was really everything to him. There was not a time that music wasn't playing when he was around. Michael first became ill with what he ultimately passed away from. Sometime in the late 1990s, he had arthritis, quite severe arthritis, and he was having hip replacement surgery, and as part of that, they banked his blood, and in banking his blood, found out that he was suffering from liver disease. So he actually had quite a long time of it not affecting him, and the arthritis was more of a problem. But I'd say in the last 5 years of his life, the liver, the first time Michael was in the hospital before he was palliative, when he came home, I felt like I was just adrift in the sea. You know, I really had no clue what to do, knowing he was going to be dying within, I didn't think he would last the year at that point. He did wind up lasting another year and a half, but I didn't know how to access any help at all. 2 months later, he had another crisis, and then wound up, fortunately, under the care of a wonderful palliative care doctor in Coburg. And that began our journey with CCAC and the palliative staff. Yes, Michael wanted to die at home, and I wanted him to be here till the end.
So some of the services through the palliative care program that came into his home were the lab to take blood work, because it's like half an hour to get out to Coburg to go to the lab, the visiting nurse, the personal support, and then of course through the palliative program we're able to refer to the nurse practitioner. I engage with the nurse practitioner referral on a palliative caseload generally after I've made my first home visit.
Access to Frances and her incredibly wise and caring support was so easy. I could call her. One of the first things she did, the first visit, was to tell us that if I needed to call her at 3 in the morning. I've had some wonderful, caring doctors, but the nature of our healthcare system keeps them very busy, keeps them in their office. There aren't many doctors who make home calls these days. Nurse practitioners do. Frances provided incredible care for Michael of a health nature, but also emotionally, but for me as well. Michael was upstairs in our bedroom. So after Frances was finished with that part of the visit, we'd come downstairs and talk about whatever was of concern to me, what was worrying me, and how Michael's day-to-day health was, and what signs was I seeing, and how was I doing. I don't think there was ever a visit that she didn't ask how I was doing. Having that emotional support was just made a huge difference in how both of us were handling his illness. Because I don't have a lot of friends out here.
The palliative care nurse practitioner provides support in a lot of ways. When we first meet, it's a huge appointment. It's usually about 2 hours. I feel that's important to set aside that time, and I always warn people that it's going to take a long time and it's exhausting. It depends on the person's illness and how many complications as well, but you have a lot to go through. Some of that is to make sure that you've built already a good relationship in that first visit. It's very difficult to support someone if there's not the trust, if they don't think you know what you're talking about, if you're pushing medicine on them that they don't necessarily understand why.
He didn't want to acknowledge as openly that he was dying. That was not something that he wanted to talk about, whereas I did. It was difficult for me that he wouldn't talk more openly about it. I was able to talk to Francis about that, and that made a huge difference. I think nurse practitioners are unique because they have that nursing background and that they really see their patient as a person. And they're, at least my experience with Frances, she's not afraid to put her arm around Michael and to console him. If she saw that he was being a little testy, she'd ask him, you know, why. I mean, he had his ups and downs emotionally, and she would recognize that and talk to him about that. And in my experience with doctors, I haven't had a doctor who would really address the emotional issues of an illness, whereas Frances, that was as important to her as the physical. I think they're a special breed. They kind of straddle the line between being a doctor and a nurse. I think that the most important contribution that the nurse practitioner that Frances made to our lives was just knowing that there was someone there that was overseeing everything. But I think more important was the emotional support that we received. You know, just knowing that somebody was there in our corner and that we weren't facing this alone, that, you know, she was in charge, and that was really important. There was never any question that I couldn't ask Frances. She told me everything from how Michael's breathing would change when he was in the very final stages to, you know, whether he was in pain. She really told me the minutia of what to expect. I think that to be a palliative care nurse practitioner, you really have to be a special person. I mean, you know going into that your patient is dying and that you will only be with them for a certain length of time. You don't, you know, see the whole spectrum. You're seeing them at their end of life, but your role or their role is to make that end of life as easy and as, obviously not pleasant a journey, but something that is more comfortable than, say, dying in the hospital or dying alone, or, you know, just knowing that there is somebody there that you can count on. And to, I think to have only palliative patients must be a very difficult thing. I think nurse practitioners could make a huge difference at all levels of it. I would rather have a nurse practitioner in charge of you know, not just palliative, just any care, any day.